Yes, thank you very much for coming here today and listening to my presentation. It's a bit of a miracle actually that what I'm going to talk about is about a book that was produced based on events more than 80 years ago, and I'll explain exactly what I mean. So this is the book that myself and my nephew in the UK have produced, which is that name there. And basically what happened was my father during World War II spent the last 2 years with the Special Boat Service, which is what SBS stands for. And he was operating with them in the southern Europe and the Mediterranean, Greek islands and so on. When he returned, he and his brother, by the way, I should say, that's my dad there, you can't see it from here, but anyway, and that's my uncle, you'll see it on the slides. When he returned from the war, he still had a fair amount of post-traumatic stress from the events, what we used to be called shell shock. And so he'd be sort of sitting in his rented flat with my mum after he came back from the war, and he tried to go to sleep at night, and he'd wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, in a cold sweat, dreaming he was back in Crete or Stampedia or Nisero, one of the islands where they were fighting the Nazis. So my mum said to him, why don't you get it off your mind, write a few notes, put it in a folder, file it away, forget about it. So that's what he did. He did exactly that and forgot about it, and he started to get a good night's sleep. So anyway, they remained there, the notes and the manuscript that he'd written in fountain pen ink on foolscap paper for, 300 pages or something. So he'd come back from work, he was back at work, working in London for a window company. He'd come back in the evening, spend part of his time reading and the other time writing, because in those days, as you know, no television, etc. And then he put it in a folder in the airing cupboard. No. Anyway, 80 years later, near enough, my mum had to leave the family home to go to an aged care home, and we helped her to make the move, etc. And as we were clearing the house out in order to sell the house to finance her stay at the aged care home, we found the notes, manuscript. So anyway, I started reading, and to be honest, I couldn't read it because it was a perfect copper plate. Didn't compare well with my handwritten scrawl. So anyway, I forgot all about it. Put it back in one of our cupboards down in Falcon. Anyway, to about 2 or 3 years ago, my nephew, Robert Marshall, he watched the TV series SAS Rogue Heroes. So he said to my brother, who's his dad, he said, did Grandpa, my dad, ever write anything about it? And he said, well, say anything about it. So Jay, my brother, said, well, you did. And Nick's got the notes in Australia. So, okay, so Robert then sends me an email, can he have the notes? Oh, God, there's 300 pages of, And I said, what I'll do is I'll scan each page, I'll scan 4 pages a week to you in the UK. You read them, you decipher the handwriting, word process it, send it back to me. I'll read it for word proofing and terminology. If it looks okay, then I'll email it back to you and the members of the family. The idea being that eventually Robert and everyone in the family would have a copy of what Dad had written about. So anyway, we did all this. After 2 years, we basically had a document that looks like that, including photos, chapters, you name it, the whole lot, which I'll pass around after the presentation. And then eventually, Robert, by hook or by crook, got in touch with a publishing organisation called Pen and Sword. And the lady there said to him, well, in conversation, you've written a book? I said, yes, that's right, myself and my uncle. So She said, well, look, send me a couple of chapters. If it looks of interest, I'll show it, because she was the commissioning editor for Peninsula. She said, I'll pass them on to the CEO if it's of interest, Chief Executive Officer. So she did read it and she thought it looked good, so she passed it on. And sure enough, he said, oh, this is really interesting because the guy has written a story, word for word, almost with an indelible memory, such you can actually perceive you're actually there at the time when this operation or these operations are taking place. So he said, yep, okay, we'll go ahead and publish it. Anyway, cut a long story short, it took a year, four sets of word proofs backwards and forwards, and eventually we got the book published, i.e. back to that. And that just got published 2 weeks ago. So on the screen, what you see on the SAS badge, which was the badge which both the Special Air Service and Special Boat Service used in World War II, and on the other side is the picture of the SAS wings, which was designed by a guy called Jock Lewis, who was one of the, in fact, if anyone has seen SAS Rogue Heroes, they will recognise who it is. He was a captain, I think, and he designed the wings in the shape of a canoe with a parachute in the centre, because they intended to take their operations anywhere in that region, Middle East, Greek islands, Italy, Yugoslavia, wherever, either by parachute or by canoe. So basically this presentation, the first presentation, is going to be about the amphibious operations of the SBS, Special Boat Service. Well, these are my dad's medals, and they include things like the North African Medal, the 6-year medal for the for taking part in World War II, Conduct Medal, and there are various other medals associated with that to do with his post-war activities, which involved the Army Reserve and the Army Emergency Reserve. So you've got a whole array of medals, as you can see there. I can give you the more details of that as we go on. So this is the actual book, what the book looks like. So that's the front cover, that's the back cover, and basically the front cover depicts my father, my dad, and my uncle in the centre, and to the one side of them another guy with a beret. He's a member of their Special Boat Service team. The two guys on the outside are Greek fishermen who are also Greek resistance. And then in the corner is the wings and my dad's dog tag. Oh, and on the left, I should say, there's a image of a photo taken in prior to doing the operation in Crete, and the 4 of the members of the patrol are discussing how they're going to go about doing the operation. When World War II finished, they kept a record of which of the members of the Special Boat Service had carried out which particular operations, and they wrote it in terms of who did what operation and on what dates. So this next one here is a subset of that form that I just showed you, and it shows Lance Corporal Marshal W, that's my Uncle Bill, and Gunner or GNR Marshal D, my father, who were both on those operations. Now, as you can see on the one next to W Marshal, Bill Marshal, there are actually different operations like Pesarimo, Patmos, Lipsos, Archi, Piscopi, Kos, and then underneath that Greece and the Istrian Peninsula. But you look at my dad's one, he's got down Stampalion, Nisero, Crete, Greece. So what you can see there is in the Greek islands, which are the Dodecanese islands, what they did, if they had members of the same family in the squadron or in going on a patrol in those islands to carry out operations, they'd split them onto different operations in case one lot got completely killed. So at least there would be one other member of the family in another patrol. But it lists here who they were, when they did the operation, the dates between when and when, and we use this particular information as part of our trying to get the chronology behind the book, so we had the timing of each event in about the right order. The bits I've highlighted show more or less the areas where, down on the bottom there, where it says Azib and Mercimer True, those are the areas where they did their training. Above that is the Greek islands. Above that is Greece. Across from that is a place called Monopoly in southern Italy. Above that is, on the right, Istria, which is northern Yugoslavia, and above that, the Brenner Pass, which is a conduit between northern Italy and southern Germany. I'll jump onto this one now. This is the area where Azib and Athlit in Palestine, as it was before it was Israel, where the Special Boat Service and SAS did quite a lot of their training, learning how to carry out their weapon training, use explosives, boat training, parachute training and so on. And then this one here is the islands, so you can just about see the islands of Rhodes on one side, and then you've got Stampalia and Nisero just above that, and then the others like Pesarimo, Patmos and so forth above that again. All of those are the Dodecanese islands. Dodecanese means 10 islands, and they were all on the far reaches of the Greek, what was owned by the Greeks, right off western Turkey. And then in the centre of the Mediterranean, of course, is the island of Crete, which was strategically important to both the Germans and to the Allies, because it was used as by the Nazis as being like a floating aircraft carrier for aircraft to take off and bomb and shoot down various Allied aircraft and so on. The first operation they took part in Dad's operation was in Stampalia, and when they arrived, I should explain, by the way, when they went on the operation, they went from North Africa to Western Turkey, where I was just showing you before, and they used a thing called a Tufik, which was a schooner, about 50, 60 foot long boat, as their forward operating base. So the SBS teams would be accommodated and live and eat on that particular schooner, and then they would go from there on a motor launch across, or submarine, whatever, across to the islands. And this particular island is Stampalia, and the operation they had to undertake there was to destroy that seaplane and a number of Greek fishing boats called kikes, which the Germans had commandeered for their own use. So their SBS team went over to the island. They went up to an observation point up in the mountain, up in the cliffs above the harbour, hid away in the caves, observed what the opportunities were, and at night time they would then go down, get into the freezing cold water, January 1944, and swim over to the seaplane and the other kikes, and then they would plant plastic explosives called Lewis bombs. Going back to what I was saying before, Jock Lewis was the member of the SAS who had invented 808 plastic explosive, and they put into these things a thing called a time pencil, which was like a pencil full of acid, and when you break it, the acid burns through till it reaches the fuse. Then the fuse ignites and then sets off the detonator. So it gave them time to get into the water, get to the aircraft at night time in freezing cold water, put it on the boat, put it on the float plane, put it on the kikes, and then get away before these things exploded. So that was the first operation, SBS. From there, they went down across to Merzimer True, and then the next operation after Nisro was going to be in Crete. Now, as a matter of interest, these are original silk maps that were issued to members of the Special Boat Service, and what they would do is they'd have them folded up, and they'd have wrapped around their waist. And the reason they were silk is that if they were paper, obviously when they got wet, they'd tear, whereas silk doesn't. So these are the very original maps they were issued with by the Army, by the SBS, which they took on their operations, and they'd never been cleaned, because if they were, they'd fall apart. They've still got some blood marks on them from some of the operations as well. In this picture is my nephew, who co-wrote the book with me. He went back to Crete week before last because he wanted to physically find out where the caves and the observation points, the lying up positions, and where the operations actually took place in Crete. And this particular cave is one that was identified from records produced by the SBS and Special Operations Executive from World War II, held in London. And he found it, went over with a team of others from former SOE relatives, and they found it. And he took the book with him and had a photograph taken there. This one is actually one of my photographs, but I couldn't find any, because obviously when the SBS were doing their World War II operations, there weren't any war correspondents or journalists. So this is just to show what it looks like after an ambush has been taken place, and a troop or a patrol of special forces then disappear after an ambush. This is taken by us, myself and Cynthia, my wife, and my brothers and Robert, and the rest of the family all met up in Crete last year to go and look at some of these places. And that one is taken in August 2024 of what the Cretan mountains actually look like. And this is the type of territory and the grounds that these guys had to operate in. And they were never issued with the proper sort of mountain gear. They're still walking around in desert boots, not proper Dunlop moulded sole boots. They weren't given the proper sort of clothes. They had light windproofs and so on and so forth. So in the winter it was pretty cold, and in the summer, well, the feet got torn to shreds wearing desert boots in mountains. One thing I should have said earlier is that one of the reasons that my dad and Bill were recruited into the SBS was that they had been, prior to this, 4 years in the Royal Artillery in the UK, and then they were then sent out to the Middle East. But when they got there, they didn't want to stay with the Royal Artillery. They wanted to have more action. So they saw an advert for volunteering for the SBS, and because they both had signallers experience, they volunteered to become signallers in the patrols going on to these operations. In order to do that, it's a different type of radio different type of wireless or signalling type of communications. Whereas before they've been using voice in Royal Artillery situations where they'd be forward operating base, watching aircraft coming over, signalling back to the artillery gunners, so coming over at this height, that speed, and then the gunners would actually shoot them down. Now, the type of signalling was a different type of signalling. It had to be done in Morse, and it had to be done in encrypted Morse, such that it couldn't be intercepted by the Germans or deciphered. So that's the type of radio set they had. They had different types of crystals to change frequencies, which they did more often than not. And each signaller had a thing called a one-time pad, which was a book of codes that described what the particular thing is they were going to do. So it's going to be knock out a fuel supply or destroy a bridge or shoot a tank up or something. Then they had a 5-code description of what these things were. It would be written in Morse, and then the signallers at the base would have the same one-time pad. So between the two of them, they knew what the particular codes were going to be, so it could be deciphered from the encryption. And there's an example of a type of cipher they would do. So they would write out the cipher on a piece of paper, and then they would sit down and key it on with a tapper on the right side of the radio set. This one's to do with the fuel dump fuel supply demolition on Crete. This picture here is actually in the book as well, and it's a picture of a photo of Dad, but underneath the photograph is the original, what they call Fairbairn Sykes dagger. This was designed by two Scottish gentlemen who designed it as a lethal dagger, and it was issued to all special forces and commandos. And that dagger there is the original dagger with the original sheath. Now, when they were issued with that, they were also issued with a particular type of trouser that had a slot in the right side or left side of the trouser leg, into which the knife would go, and then there'd be the sheath on the inside of the trouser leg. So if for any reason they were attacked by a member of the enemy wouldn't know necessarily had a knife, but they could pull down and, you know. So that's how they operated. It was actually manufactured by Wilkinson Sword, but designed by these two Scots guys. I mentioned earlier on about the forward operating base. It's called the Tewfik, which was a schooner moored off the west coast of Turkey, and it was about 50 foot long. As you can see, there are various members of the SBS patrols actually on the boat, accommodated there, and board and lodging. And they also use these things called foal boats. The foal boat's like a canoe, which is a canoe but actually folds in half, and you have a waterproof skin wraps around the outside. So, for example, if you're travelling on a motor launch and you've got to quickly get into the water to go from the motor launch onto the island you're going to tack on, and it's all done at night, of course, then the foal boat is opened up and the skin is put around the outside, so the two operators of that particular canoe can then put it into the water and canoe onto the island. So what would happen is they would leave the Tewfik schooner on a motor launch, say from Western Turkey, go across to the southern island of Crete, and when they're within, say, a mile or so of the southern beach, they would then unfold open up the foal boat, climb into it, and then canoe from the motor launch to the landing point on the beach, fold the boat up again, hide it, and then they climb up in the mountains to go to the target. One of the guys who was involved in the operations there was this guy called Maurice Anderson. Now, he was involved in the Stampalia one, which I mentioned earlier on, the one where they were blowing up the Junkers float plane and the kikes. And this other guy, Ian Patterson, he was a former member of the parachute regiment who'd been up in Europe, and he then came down and joined the SBS. He took part in an operation on an island called Nisero, and on this island they had a convent which was looking after orphans. When the Germans arrived there, they wanted to remove the orphans from the island to take them to another island, because the Germans wanted to use Nisero for a particular thing they were going to do. And the Mother Superior, who in charge of the convent, didn't want that to happen. So when these guys landed on the island, this guy, Ian Patterson, had a chat with them and said, "What do you want us to do?" So she said, "Well, I want the orphans to stay here." So he said, "Okay, what I'll do," he says, "I'll dress up as a priest. When the Germans come to take the orphans away," he said, "then I'll greet them, bring them into the convent, and as soon as they're in there, we'll shoot them. And the ones that get out, if any get out, we'll put the rest of the patrol on the perimeter of the convent, and they can shoot the other ones that come out." That's what they did. So he got a medal for that. Les Stevenson was another member of the Special Boat Service Patrol. He had been originally in the Royal Artillery, I think, when they first were defending Crete, but he was captured by the Germans, but he managed to escape. And as soon as he escaped, he went up into the mountains. And in the mountains were the Cretan resistance called the Andates. Very tough bunch of people. They sort of wore leather boots, and they had daggers and all this sort of stuff, and they routinely killed Germans that came up in the mountains. So Les joined them, and then when the SBS started to do their operations on Crete, then Les automatically became part of the SBS team, because apart from his experiences and his military knowledge, he had also become fluent in Greek. Another guy here called Dick Harden, he was one of the officers in charge of the operation on Crete, and that was to do with blowing up a fuel dump and also destroying a bridge. And they, in the process of doing that, when those particular things had been carried out, they were then back up in the mountains again, getting back into hiding. And a German staff car came up into the mountains, which was unusual. So they shot it up, and he was in charge of the patrol that did that. This guy, Hugh Fraser, he was the Special Operations Executive who worked with the Special Boat Service and with the Cretan Resistance on Crete. And so he again was able to translate in Greek. He knew about how to work on a wireless operation. He was in charge of linking the different Cretan groups together on the island if they ever had to have a larger contingent shooting up a particular place. He was the one who'd bring it all together. Another guy here, he was originally a member of the British South African Police, which was basically Rhodesia in those days, and he became part of the Special Operations Executive and Special Boat Service. His actual role was never made particularly clear, but what a lot of the people who swanned around in the World War II with these special operations, they were called funnies, because they didn't have a particular title or a particular name, but they operated in between different groups. This is what this guy did. Many of them survived after the war as well. That was the bridge that was going to be blown up in Crete, called Kufi, and we went to see that last year, and to this day there's still the holes in the brick structure where the Germans had originally intended to blow it up, because they were thinking when they left the island they wanted to make it difficult for anybody to reoccupy it, and in fact the SBS had in mind to blow it up as well. So to this day the holes are still there in the bricks. When after the Cretan operation, the SBS moved from the islands to mainland Greece to liberate the Greek mainland and liberate Athens, and they parachuted into Patras, which is on the west coast of Greece, and that picture was taken at 3 o'clock in the morning. One of the roles they had to do the SBS had to do during their operations was that from time to time, apart from shooting up the enemy, they actually had to take prisoners. And this particular guy, Hans Hype, was a German sailor, and he and a couple of other guys were captured by SBS. But they obviously couldn't take them in operations, so they had to return them somewhere where they could be put into a prisoner of war camp. So they took them to Cyprus, and then took a boat from Cyprus to Haifa, and then when they got to Haifa, the Israelis weren't too keen to see Germans, and they were going to string them up, and the SBS prevented that from taking place, and these guys ended up going to a prisoner of war camp. I met that guy later, by the way, years later. It's another story. So after the mainland of Greece, the SBS were returned to southern Europe, southern Italy, which by now had been cleared of fascists by Germans, and all the Italians had now gone over to the Allies, and the SBS used Monopoly down on the south coast here as a forward operating base to then launch an operation to northern Yugoslavia, a place called Istria, which is right up at the top end of, just in that triangle there, where it says Pula. That is the southern tip of Istria. And what was happening was that the German army by this time, this is around about 1945 era, about April or May, March, April, something like that. The German army was retreating up through southern Europe to defend their homeland, and there was still some of the shipping going up through the Adriatic, this sea here, and so the SBS and the Long Range Desert Group went up through Greece, Albania and Yugoslavia, to northern Yugoslavia, to the Istrian Peninsula, and their job was to then coast watch the shipping coming along so they could radio the RAF and other Allied air forces to shoot up the shipping returning back to southern Europe, the German shipping. After the war, there were reunions in London at the Duke of York's headquarters in Chelsea, held by SAS and SBS. And this guy here, Manoli Kanakakis, was one of the original Cretans who had worked with the SBS in Crete when they carried out the operations on Kufi and so on and so forth. And he's talking here to a couple of other people from the reunion. There's my dad, another SBS guy and a para guy in the background, on a truck heading back to the UK via Rome in 1945, about the time when the war had come to an end. I think it was the 8th of May. And yeah, looking quite happy about it. The family went over to Crete, as I mentioned, last year, and we went to visit Manoli's grave in Kufi, and that is his gravestone there. There's myself, Robert, who's my co-author, and my two brothers, Ian and Jay. All we went back up to Kufi to see if there were any remnants of Manoli's family still there. Sure enough, there were. His niece still lives in that house, and when we went into, she invited us to go into the house and look at Manoli's house. So when we went up, about 3 flights up, we looked down into the courtyard. Sure enough, in the courtyard, Manoli had bought an old car, Morris Minor, parked in the courtyard, and has an SAS SBS badge on the back window. So this day, the car's covered in sand and dust. And that's the book, by the way, the one that is for sale. Now, Robert actually had gone to the trouble to use a program called Grok. This is where the shoot up of the staff car up in Crete. Yeah, thank you for watching.